Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live. My name is Kim Lantis, and I'm very happy to be back today. I was out unexpectedly yesterday, but my fearless co-host, America Guerrero, was able to handle everything, and it was a great show. Thank you, America.
You're welcome.
It was her very first show all by herself. Today's guest, of course, is Rachel Carpenter, who is the CEO and co-founder of Intrinio. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
It's good to be here. I'm super excited. I always like it when it's an all-female panel. Maybe I shouldn't, but it somehow feels incredibly empowering. And we're, of course, talking about fintech and the future of fintech, which really makes me excited as well, because we're going to answer the question of what's next. But before we do, Rachel, we'd love to get to kind of know you, your story, your background, and sort of what's led up to today a bit more. Please share us a bit about yourself. Thank you.
Sure. So as we were chatting about earlier, I actually grew up in Wisconsin, attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I double majored in finance and entrepreneurship. I knew that I just didn't ever really want to work for somebody, and I wanted to be my own boss. And so I started with just a finance major because I've always loved math. I've been very good at math. And then added the entrepreneurship to kind of start to head down the track of thinking about starting my own business. And so I kind of always had that fire in me. I had a lot of bad bosses throughout the day, and I knew I wanted to be better, and I thought I could do a better job. And so I wanted to head down that track. And I met my co-founder, whose name is Joey French, while I was in school. And we went on this interesting journey where we thought we were going to build one company, and we ran into a huge problem and ended up having to build a totally different company, which ended up being a good thing. We pivoted into it. But the journey to get there was interesting, right? We had this kind of traditional academic background in finance and accounting. But in order to start building what we wanted to build, I actually had to kind of jump off the cliff and teach myself how to program, which was quite a journey. It was awful, if I'm being honest. It took forever. I was just basically Googling. I used Google, how do you program, and found a lot of resources online. And over the course of the year, between myself and my co-founder, we got kind of dangerous enough to mix all the skills together. So that's kind of a little bit about my background, a little bit how I got started. Traditional academia, slept on a couch for a year when I graduated, turned down all the job offers I had, taught myself how to program, and kind of merged all of that, like the entrepreneurial fuel, the background in traditional finance, and then learning how to program as kind of like the foundation that really ended up supporting the launch of Intrinio. So that's a little bit about how I got started.
Wow. It tells us an extreme amount about your character, qualities that I myself personally do not possess. I think it's interesting when we talk with entrepreneurs on the show, like, strangely, I'm happy being an employee, right? Entrepreneurship, at least at this point in my life, has not kind of been of interest to me. But I think it's fine because we need both, right? In this world. Yes. So very, very cool. So let's talk a bit more about Intrinio exactly. So this came kind of right off of your college days, worked hard to make it happen. Who are you? What are you? What's the problem that you're solving? Clearly involves programming.
Yeah, it does. So we have this phrase at Intrinio called "by developers for developers," and that's really the foundation of what we built. And I'll tell you a little quick story about how we got started because it will illustrate why we're doing what we're doing. So my co-founder and I were trying to build a finance investing app, right? Type in a ticker like Apple or Facebook or Tesla, and it'll tell you whether to buy the stock, right? At a very, very basic level. The problem is, in order to do that type of analysis in like an investment app, you need a lot of data. So we spent a year of our lives putting this app together, building the interface, all of the logic in the background to do the analysis on the stocks and tell you what stock to buy. But when you're analyzing stocks, you need data, right? You need to know how much money the company is making. You need to know the stock price. You need maybe some economic information. What are the analysts estimating is going to happen to the stock price? Some forward-looking data, some historical data, some real-time data. You need tons of data, right? It's a lot of analysis. And so we were actually illegally screen scraping data from 10,000 plus websites because that's how much data we needed to power this thing, right? And we knew we were just prototyping. We knew we really could not launch a legitimate business that way. So names of data providers that you might be familiar with is like a Bloomberg, right? And so we went and called all these large data providers I kid you not, we were quoted between $70,000 and $80,000 a month just to get the data to put it into our app. So, and that was like a starting fee, right? So you can imagine we're fresh out of college, we have negative money. This just wasn't going to work for us. And it pretty much killed our entire company. So that illustrates what the reason Intrinio is here, right? We wanted to make data easier, make it more accessible. We knew this new generation of programmers and fintech innovators were going to be building the apps of the future. But if they can't get their hands on the raw materials to build their apps, how is that innovation ever going to take flight, right? And so that became our mission, was to work behind the scenes, unlock a lot of those data sets, put them in the hands of innovators like Robinhood, which is one of our clients. And then when you start to look at some of these new apps that are popping up, we're just happy behind the scenes plugging in all the data, right? You scroll to the bottom and it says data powered by Intrinio. And so we're kind of making all the data and the charts and the graphs and the displays come alive for all these innovators. But most important point being, it doesn't cost you millions of dollars a year. It doesn't take weeks to get access. It is fast, it is easy, it is affordable, it is accessible. We're making everything easier and faster to really get the data flowing to spark innovation in this space.
Wow. And really on the forefront too, I think of this generation, something that you hit on with larger, more traditional companies, is this idea of democratizing things, simple accessibility, where there's been way too many gatekeepers with too few keys for way too long. Yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Perfect. So this kind of brings us into the specifics of today's topic as we lean into the future. What is the topic as chosen by Rachel America?
Open data and the API economy, the future of fintech. API companies like Stripe, Plaid, and Intrinio have provided a foundation for a new generation of fintech. What comes next? So please share with us, why did you choose this topic? Why is it relevant for today's show?
Yeah. So there's a lot of innovation and tech happening in financial services that is very much under the surface, right? Under the hood, not where many people look, right? And I think Stripe, actually, the co-founders of Stripe have this famous quote. They were like, it's not something that if you bring it up at the Thanksgiving dinner table, anybody's going to have any idea what you're talking about, right? This isn't like a consumer technology that everybody uses every day. It's really behind the scenes, but it's super important, right? And I would love to bring more awareness to the API economy because it's really what's making everything run right now. It's under the hood, it's the foundation, it's the infrastructure. It's not sexy, right? But I think it is a little bit, and I think it's a lot of fun. And so it's interesting. We've almost kind of gotten used to how easy everything has gotten and how embedded fintech has become everywhere, right? You look at companies like Stripe, whenever you go sign up for a subscription online, you're probably using Stripe to pay for it, right? It's all integrated in the background. Whenever you're connecting your bank accounts to one of your investment apps, you're probably using Plaid, right? And these are other APIs that are running in the background. When you're looking at your stocks on Robinhood, all that data in the background is coming through Intrinio APIs, right? So it's just under the surface, but it's really powering a lot of critical components of fintech on many different levels, right? Consumer fintech, enterprise fintech, all across the board. So that's why I chose it, right? Because I think there's some companies doing really interesting things under the hood. And what comes next piece, right, is like when you get all of these APIs running out of view under the surface, a lot of really cool stuff gets built on top of it, right? So the apps that we're seeing come out, all the different tools, all the different technologies are powered by these APIs that are running behind the surface. And those innovators, it's like layers, right? Those innovators are building on top of it, and they're really defining what the future is going to look like. And it's exciting to watch.
Yeah. You have layers like an onion or a parfait,
yes.
Right? My Shrek reference there.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because I think the point that you hit on, at least for me, is this: we don't even see it. Myself, not having a tech background, not directly working, behind coding or anything like that, it's still this concept that's tricky for me to understand. The entire idea of an API, the easiest way for me to think about it is just like maybe like a bridge is sort of the visualization that I get. And the idea that I would say, even like to your point, invisible bridges. Like I don't even think about them. They're there. But they're just like magically kind of like doing their thing. So how do you go about being maybe what's the word, an evangelist of this. Are people really getting on board? Are more and more companies, or do you still have to kind of teach and educate on APIs, their place in where we are today, as well as where we're headed? What does that look like? How has this maybe shifted over the last few years?
I think the general awareness of the API economy is starting to get there, right? People have basic understandings. They understand that it's a bridge, it's a connection to pull data from one place to another. I think we've come a long way. I would say my mom probably still doesn't know what an API is, right? So it's not that mainstream. The good news is for us, I think for customers of a Stripe, customers of a Plaid, customers of an Intrinio, they've been hungry for this kind of technology for so long, right? I mean, I probably wasn't the only one trying to build an app and not able to afford the data. Bloomberg didn't really even have a functioning API. They didn't have developer tools. They weren't prioritizing these things. And so this new kind of proliferation of APIs, I think, has been a long time coming. And so when you have innovators that are looking for this type of data, they know what it is, they come to your website, they get their API keys, and they're off to the races, right? It's really quick. So for our target markets, right, of companies like Stripe, Plaid, and Intrinio, they get it, they know it. There's very little education, right? Because we're selling to developers and it's built by developers. And so they really get it, and they can kind of get up and running very quickly. And they're just grateful that they actually have open data.
Yeah, exactly. Just give me what I need to be able to do what I want to do. And I'm guessing, referring back to the very beginning of the show, when you talked about this business pivot, this is it. This was the pivot. Let's talk a little bit about that aha moment. I did read on your site, I think, something about
the egg.
Yes, exactly. Like basically you were trying to develop a golden egg, but then you realized, holy moly, we actually have the goose that lays the golden egg. I would love to know more about that story.
Yeah. So another analogy too that I use is like putting gas in a car, right? Like we thought we were going to build a car. We thought we were going to build an app, but the fuel in this industry is data, right? Everything, that's the gas. We couldn't afford the gas. We couldn't afford to put gas in our car. And so that's a closer analogy to how it felt when we pivoted was I went, okay, we can bury our heads in the ground trying to be able to afford data so we can like build our car and get it out of the driveway. Or we can instead focus on the gas industry and then we can put gas in everybody's car, right? Like then we can be the fuel kind of behind the industry. And I think I was angry enough at how I had like my whole app just went down the drain because of the inaccessibility of data that I almost wanted to do that for everybody else. I was like, I don't want anyone else to have to deal with this. This has to be easier. Let's solve this problem when we can kind of be a catalyst behind the scenes for a lot of this innovation. So it was like the fuel, right? It was like, okay, this didn't work. Maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing. It's not the car, it's the gas. Let's unleash the floodgates, right? Let's go over here and focus on that instead. And it took a while because building data businesses is tough. You have to, it's not like building an MVP for software, right? You can build a software MVP in like a day if you wanted to, but building a data set takes years. So there was a lot of time to really get focused on building technology, but it was so worth it.
That's amazing. I understand that there's obviously proprietary elements and intellectual property that come into play. But what can you tell us about that process of building that data set? Maybe what you discovered that's worked really well, what wouldn't work for those people who might be interested in kind of following the same path? Because I think to me, it's an interesting path, generationally speaking, and going back to earlier at the show, like this idea of many of the problems that we have in the world, whether it's tech related or not, do not have to exist if people would simply just let go of this idea of realizing that there's more than enough to kind of go around, right? Yeah. It reminds me of past show, years and years ago, we had a guest on the show, Josie Ginsburg, and he used an analysis of the jungle, right? That like no animal or creature in the jungle is struggling to survive. Like it is a land of the plenty, and all we have to do is sort of find that niche that's going to work for us. And so I guess long story, I talked a lot here, but my question is, what's that story for you? What's the process of building like that aha moment of, first of all, you were powered by anger, which you shared, but that realization that there's more than enough to go around. I genuinely want to help. And then that process that you use to kind of make that happen.
Yeah, well, a good example of what you're touching on here is like the Bloomberg terminal, right? We don't care. People should buy Bloomberg terminals. If you're an analyst and you're not a developer, you need to be able to like look at a screen to see the data, right? And that's fine. We hope they do great. We hope Bloomberg terminals are around forever. People need them. We're way more focused on the developer feeds, right? And so to your point, right, there's plenty of data out there and there's plenty of use cases and there's plenty of niche ways that you can specifically build data for specific types of people, right? So I totally agree with you on that. And then a little bit about how the technology works, right? Like data's everywhere, right? It's at the stock exchanges, it's at the SEC, it's at the Federal Reserve, it's on our mobile phones. I mean, it's everywhere. And so we oftentimes think about our technology under the hood like a data pipeline, right? We call it the data journey. It's out in the wild. How do we pull it through all these steps that it needs to go through to get sourced, to get in the database, to get structured?
And legally.
Legally, yes. Absolutely. Everything we do at Intrinio is legal. But there are a million steps in there, right? There's a lot happening under the hood. We're using machine learning to clean and match and standardize the data, to check for errors and flag things automatically. So there's data sourcing, data processing, data cleansing, data standardization, data quality, data distribution, tools, documentation. There's all of these steps under the hood. And we have proprietary innovations across each step of the way to put things in perspective, right? For one of our data sets, it's fundamental data, just like financial statements for public companies, right? What is the income of Apple? This type of basic data. S&P and Bloomberg and these teams, these bigger institutions, they do it all manually. And so they have teams of anywhere between 300 and 10,000 people doing the
actually going to be the next question of how much of this requires a human and how much of this is leaning on code tech.
Yeah. So we have a team of 2 people that maintains that data set, not 300 to 10,000, right? And so that's to your earlier point about democratization, right? That's the innovation where we've automated, we've leveraged machine learning, we've started from the base level that way so that everything is efficient and scalable over time. All of those cost savings get passed down to our end users, right? That's the democratization. That's the opening up. We don't have to hire 10,000 people. We've been smarter about it, right? And so that's the automation under the hood that really is the power behind the product.
Sorry, I lost my mic. I couldn't unmute myself. It actually reminds me of a show from last week. It's a different vertical, of course, but this was with Bhaskar Krishnan. He's the CEO and founder of Cognivision. And what they do is they work with viewers. But he talked about something that I found really interesting in the terms of the last mile, which for them, they have the tech that's building the viewer. And then that last mile is actually the person being able to visually go through very quickly, because our brains kind of have that capability of processing in a way that still a machine does not. And so when I think about your 2 individuals or your team members that you mentioned, I see they're the last mile. You've got the tech that brings you all the way up and makes it so easy. But then that tech makes people able to do what people do best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And our customers are doing the last mile, right? Like, we're doing the first mile, the second mile, the third mile, getting it all ready. And then what you build on top of the data is the true magic, right? That's when you see Robinhood. That's when you see companies like FTX that are clients of ours doing really cool things on top of the data. And they're taking it the last mile for their customers, and they're each their own kind of unique way.
Very, very cool. What about other use cases? You've mentioned Robinhood a couple times, but how else are you seeing companies utilize your data?
Well, and that's a great question, because that gets to the what comes next, right? It's like, okay, the API economy is moving, the data is getting unlocked, it's getting in the hands of all these innovators. What are they doing, right? And that's where it gets exciting. The themes that we've seen, right? We sell data to fintech companies like Robinhood and FTX. We sell data to hedge funds, asset management firms, public companies, consulting firms, venture capital firms. You name it, right? This data is needed by a lot of different use cases for it, right? Whether you're displaying it inside of a tool you're building or just crunching it for some internal investment analysis, those are usually the 2 primary use cases. But the themes that we've seen, right? Number 1, retail trading, which is like democratization on top of democratization, right? Like, we've democratized the data so that people can build apps so that anyone can learn to invest, right? And that's beautiful, right? Like, the number of retail investors and the amount of education that's gone into investments globally is insane. We've got, I think 100 out of the 300 million people in the United States are retail investors and actually investing for themselves now, right? So that's the innovation on top of the innovation. So I can't wait to see what else our customers build, right? The bringing forward shareholder voices, like putting power in the hands of the retail investors instead of just the institutions. These types of themes we've seen our customer base building for that, which is really cool. And then also AI, right? The automated investing kind of scene has exploded as well. And there's a lot of really cool tools that are popping up just because AI is accessible also now, right? Everyone can start to use machine learning and the tools are a little more open source and it's kind of reached its iPhone moment, which is exciting. So those are two trends that we're seeing on top of the API economy that are starting to pop up.
That's wonderful. I have a question from the audience. And this is related, for example, you're talking about learning how to invest. And then this the audience is asking how to learn to code when you're having this business perspective. For example, Antonio, hey, loving the talk and love the Shrek reference. Rachel, I'm a digital architect that hasn't learned how to code yet, and I'm lost where to start. I definitely want to focus on data analysis and decision making. How do you recommend to start?
Great question. And good for you for wanting to dive into this. The beauty of this now is that everything is available for almost for free online, right? You just have to know the right places to go. Code Academy is a great place to start. And then my advice always for programmers is you start to learn to code by copying other people's code. Programming is just copying. You find somebody else that did it, you copy, you paste, you read it, you figure it out. And so seriously, that's how engineers work.
Because internally yesterday, one of our coders, yesterday was International Dev Day, I think. And he was like, happy copy paste run day, folks. And I cracked up. I was like, I don't even live in that universe. And yet it made me laugh. Sorry for the question.
No, that's totally fine. But it's true, right? So just spending hours digging into Stack Overflow and GitHub is just immerse yourself in Stack Overflow and GitHub, copy, paste people's code, just dive in. And then probably Python and R, based on this viewer's question, right? Business analytics and decision-making, that's more statistical style of programming. Those are probably the two languages. Find an online course, literally just Google. There's a ton out there for free, like Code Academy. And you can get up and running and just teach yourself online, right? Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of these like code boot camps. You pop out and you're just kind of like a junior engineer and the world is changing around you so fast that like self-learning and doing it yourself on just the internet is honestly the best way to go.
Great. I will take that. Yeah. It's something that I want to start learning as well. It's like, I'm eager to learn about that world.
Do it. Mm-hmm. What would you say about that fear component that people might be facing? You seem to be one. I think. What do you say? You have to be. Being brave doesn't mean that you're not afraid, right? It's actually quite the opposite. If you weren't afraid, you'd just be suicidal, insane, or fill in the blank with any.
We have fear for a reason. It's good. Yes.
But how have you been able? What techniques or work for you, or thought processes in the terms of wanting to go down this entrepreneurial path so early, pivoting when you saw that being able to let go when you were on a path that wasn't going to work out and you were able to see a path that would probably work out better, being able to teach yourself to code and be like, oh God, run, I hope this works. I mean, what are your techniques individually or that you've seen other people around you utilize to be able to do even when you might be afraid to do it?
Right. Well, I think if you dig a couple layers deeper, right, everybody's afraid. They're lying to you if they say they aren't. You're just scared, but you just do it anyway is kind of how it works, right? And so usually the fear is of failure, right? At the most basic level, you're a perfectionist, right? You want to be good at it day one, and you're not going to be. You're going to be horrible day one, right? Like you're not going to be good at it. And so there's kind of two pieces to it for me, right? It's like being okay with sucking at something and like knowing you're going to be accepting that and knowing that that's the only way. You have to be bad before you're good kind of a concept is really, really important and getting comfortable with that. And the second piece attached to that is the concept of incremental growth, right? Like you're not going to build a website in one day. And like, I literally went through this step by step when I was teaching myself how to program. I was like, just make the screen turn blue, right? That's all we got to do today. And tomorrow, maybe we'll make a header at the top and then we'll put some text over here and then rotate it to the right, like step by step by step. And then before you know it, you build and it accelerates and then you're coding, right? But it doesn't happen overnight. So like being okay sucking in the beginning and then being okay knowing that it's going to be a step-by-step incremental growth. Nobody snaps their fingers and is good at something. day one.
Embracing failure as one of your values.
Or just the realization that tomorrow I will suck less than I sucked today. This is the suckiest I will ever be.
Exactly. Yep. It can only get better from here. Yeah.
Perfect. We're actually into like our final few minutes of the show. We always like to touch on the company culture, lessons learned, words of wisdom. We already talked, I think, quite a bit about that in terms of getting over our fear and not being afraid to suck. But let's talk about the future, not just of fintech and how APIs play into that, but the future of companies, company culture. What have you built at Intrinio, and what do you look towards kind of continuing to build that maybe other leaders might be able to?
Yeah.
Kind of.
You touched on one of our core values, which is failure, experimentation, right? I hire really smart people and I get out of their way. I want them to surprise me. I want them to screw up. I want them to experiment. We've got to move fast. We're innovating, right? And so there's this half serious joke at Intrinio called like, ask me for forgiveness, not permission, right? Every month, sometimes I ask my team, I'm like, tell me something you screwed up, right? Because if you didn't, you're not trying enough. Like, I'm not going to yell at you. I want you to be trying things. Tell me what you learned if it went wrong, right? And so, but it takes a long time to get people in that mindset because you're so afraid of being wrong and failing and getting in trouble and having your boss yell at you. Like, you really have to work with your team to open up and have that sense of like security and safety to experiment and to push the envelope. It doesn't happen overnight. So that's really key to us. Automation is key to everything we do. I'm like, if you automate away your job, I'll just promote you, right? Like, turn yourself into a robot. It's great. We love that. And then we also have this concept called Be the Star-Lord at Intrinio. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's kind of like how our personality is as a company, right? Like, we're the nice guy. Like, we're making things easier and more affordable, and we're great with our customers, and we're just the nice guy, but we're also like competent as hell, right? Like, we're gonna like dominate the galaxy. And so there's this balance of being like the best at what we do, but being nice about it, right? Like, we're operating in this industry of huge financial giants, and people work with us and they're like alarmed that we're being nice to them, right? And so
like,
it seems
too good to be true. And you're like, no, it's not.
And it's like, who hurt you, right? Like, who are these like big companies you're used to working with that are not nice to you? It seems like such a basic concept, but not a lot of companies think that way, right? And so that's huge to who we are. But everything I just mentioned, right? Like, you're hiring people out of corporate America and out of these huge jobs who just are ingrained in this culture that has them afraid to rock the boat, afraid to innovate, afraid to fail. Like, and it really takes time to work with your team to get them to trust and to operate that way.
I think that's an interesting point. And I guess my question for you is, where is you as a leader? And I mean, I'm not sure how involved you are directly with like the hiring process, but how do you either search for individuals who've already kind of accomplished those things in terms of cultural fit, or are you also open to sort of unteach and reteach? What do you look for? And I don't know if I'm making sense of my question. Both.
Yeah, yeah. So like, on one hand, right, like, I don't like to hire engineers that majored in CS, like, to what I talked about earlier, right? Like, programming languages and new technologies are popping up every day. And if you're used to having your nose in a textbook, you're like, that's not how coding works. It's not like a classroom thing, right? So like, the guys who
taught
real life
works in anything.
No,
like, heck, the only thing I remember from university is learning how to learn. That's it. I can't tell you anything else. Yeah.
Same. So like, the guys and women who are teaching themselves how to program, I'd hire 10 times over somebody who just like came out of a code school, right? Because you're curious, you're staying on top of trends, you're self-learning. Like, so that's like hiring specifically for that kind of a person, right? But the other half of it is really just intuition, like finding people that need to be unlearned, that kind of cultural piece, and then pushed a little. Like, I'm good at that. And I think identifying who those people are who have the potential to fit into the culture is more of an art than it is a science. It's just in how you talk to them, how you interview them, the questions you ask. It's really an intuition. When it comes to people and hiring, to me, it's all gut. Like, there is no science to it. And my gut has never been wrong whenever I've hired or fired somebody. So I think that's important, but we do both, right? We hire the engineers that are already that way, and then we hire people who are interested and open to that concept.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our half hour today. If you can believe it, time flies when you are having fun.
It does.
Rachel, you are a powerhouse, a woman to be reckoned with, and I admire you greatly. Thank you so much for spending your time with us for teaching us, and wish you and Intrinio nothing but more success in the future of FinTech. Hang on with us just a minute before we go off air. But before we do, America, who will we be talking with tomorrow?
Dan Shapiro, founder and CEO at Glowforge. The topic is going to be about what are you going to do with laser? Learn how to invent a new product category, scaling to $100 million in sales, and upend the world economy, all while making wonderful things. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific. Yesterday I said
Yeah, it's
10
going to be a
p.m.
fun
Pacific.
one.
Yeah, it's going to be
Dan,
really
I
fun.
understand, was really big on how to utilize Kickstarter and then make really cool things because of it. So I'm excited for that. Thank you again, Rachel, so much for your time with us today. Everyone else,
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
stay safe. See you tomorrow.